Now is the part of the class where the rubber hits the road. We're going to talk about how to set aperture and shutter speed on your camera, and primarily, we're going to talk about your mode dial. I'll invite you to follow along with your camera. I'm going to use a car analogy to explain how this dial is designed to be used. Choosing between using automatic and manual is like choosing between an automatic and manual car. When you're talking to the car salesman, choosing between an automatic and a manual car, there are primarily two considerations that are happening in your head. How much control do you want to have, and how much work do you want to do? It's the same with this dial. When you shoot in the automatic shooting mode, you have no control over settings and you have less work to do. When you shoot in the manual shooting mode, you have more control and there's more work to do. And then you have all the modes in between. Let's go over all of them now. Put your camera into auto mode. If you don't know which mode is auto, consult your manual. Once you're in this mode, you'll notice that you have no control over anything on your camera. The full name for this mode is full auto. Try adjusting the exposure compensation, the function we were playing with at the beginning of the class. Your camera will either not allow you to change it, or if your camera does allow you to change it, your camera will ignore the setting you choose. Now let's talk about P mode. The full name of this mode is programmed auto, and both of those words mean something. The camera is still in an auto mode, which means that the camera will choose a shutter speed and aperture for us. The first word in the name, programmed, refers to the fact that you, the photographer, can program a variety of functions in the camera. If you want, you can adjust the exposure compensation. There are quite a few other settings available to you in P mode that we won't be covering just yet. The next mode is shutter priority mode, indicated by S or TV. This is the mode that is designed for when you have a shutter speed in mind and you want the camera to take care of the aperture. You've already played in this mode, so I'm trusting you know how to change your shutter speed. The next mode is aperture priority mode, indicated by either A or AV. This is the mode that is designed for when you have an aperture in mind and you want the camera to take care of the shutter speed. After doing the aperture exercise, I expect you'll know how to change your aperture in this mode. Now I want you to put your camera into M mode, which of course means manual mode. You'll notice when you put your camera into M mode, you'll see an aperture and shutter speed on the screen. Here is the difference between manual mode and every other mode on your camera. That aperture and shutter speed is in no way a result of what your camera is looking at. That aperture and shutter speed is simply the last aperture and shutter speed your camera was set to the last time it was in manual mode. If you put your camera into manual and you take a picture, and if that picture comes out, pure luck, the camera isn't doing the work anymore. It's waiting for you to choose an aperture and shutter speed. Automatic options on cameras were introduced in the 1930s. Before then, photographers had to memorize charts of aperture and shutter speed combinations. It all started with what is called the Sunny 16 rule. The Sunny 16 rule was a general guideline that if you were photographing a sunny scene, you should start with your camera at f16 and 1/100th of a second, and then adjust your aperture shutter speed combination from there. If you wanted to be a professional photographer before the 1930s, you had to memorize that for sunny conditions, you started with one combination. For cloudy conditions, you started with another combination. For indoor photography, you started with yet another combination. A lot of photography teachers will tell you to only shoot in manual. To be blunt, I find this completely ridiculous. This is like a cooking teacher telling you to learn how to cook by only using a campfire. If you want to only shoot in manual, by all means, do it. But just realize that what you're doing when you only shoot in manual is just pretending like you live in the 1920s. It will require that you either memorize a lot or that whenever you take a picture, you'll have to do a lot of trial and error with aperture and shutter speed combinations to make your pictures come out properly exposed. In a later segment, I'll talk about when you'll want to choose one mode over another. For the next small exercise, only those of you with SLRs will be able to do this. If you don't have an SLR, please keep listening, since the larger point I'm going to make applies to your camera. For those of you with SLRs, switch into P mode. While it may seem like you don't have a lot of control over your aperture and shutter speed in this mode, you actually do. If you spin the back dial or top dial, you can actually cycle through all of your various options for shutter speed and aperture combinations that the camera thinks will give you a proper exposure. In P mode, as you can see on your own camera, you can spin the dial in one direction to shoot with a smaller aperture and a slower shutter speed, or you can spin in the other direction to shoot with a larger aperture and a faster shutter speed. Here are two pictures that were both shot in program mode. To capture the first one, I spun the dial all the way in one direction, and then to capture the second one, I spun the dial all the way in the other direction. The one on the left was shot with a smaller numbered aperture and a faster shutter speed, and the one on the right was shot with a larger numbered aperture and a slower shutter speed. You can see the differences in the depth of field, in other words, how blurry the background is, as well as how the movement is captured. When I took both shots, the toy train was moving. Here's what I want you to notice about these two shots. I used two different combinations to create these shots. For the image on the left, again, I used a smaller numbered aperture and a faster shutter speed, and the one on the right was shot with a larger numbered aperture and a slower shutter speed. Even though I used these two very different combinations, neither image is brighter or darker than the other. Even though I used these two very different combinations, the same exact amount of light came into the camera for both images. If we go back to the barrel analogy I used earlier, the first image is the same as using a fire hose for less time, in other words, a bigger aperture with a faster shutter speed, and the second image is the same as using a garden hose for more time, a smaller aperture with a longer shutter speed. Now, if you're going to try to memorize all this, really cut it out. Very simply, I want you to get that when you want a certain amount of light, there's not one combination of aperture and shutter speed that will get it done. You have options. What option you choose, or if you let the camera choose for you, depends on what you want the resulting image to look like. Now that you understand the world of aperture and shutter speed, I'm going to bring this full circle. I'm now going to connect what we were doing in the beginning of the class with aperture and shutter speed. What were we doing exactly when we were changing the exposure compensation? The exposure compensation function is available to you in P, S or TV, or A or AV modes. It is not available to you in the automatic or manual modes. If it's not clear why it's not available to you in manual mode, it will be in just a moment. As my example, I'll use P mode since that's the mode we were using when we played with the exposure compensation feature. Let's say you're in P mode and you want to go brighter. You set the exposure compensation to let in more light. Here's what you're saying to your camera if you talk to your camera like I do. Camera, I want you to let in more light. I don't care how you do it. You can either make the aperture bigger or make the shutter speed longer. Again, I don't care how you do it, just let in more light. Now let's say you do the opposite and tell the camera you want to go darker by letting in less light. What you're telling the camera is, camera, I want less light. Either make the aperture smaller or the shutter speed faster. I don't care how you do it. I just want less light. Exposure compensation is your automatic way of telling the camera you want more or less light and letting the camera decide how to make that happen. As an alternative, you can go into manual mode and make all of these decisions yourself. If you start in P mode, take a picture, and want to adjust the brightness, you could go into manual mode and change the shutter speed and or aperture in whatever way you please. It will probably require some trial and error, but you will have control over how you achieve either more or less light.